What's up, everybody? Welcome to Make Things Tiny. My name is Mick. Everyone loves the idea of saving money by going tiny, but what's the real cost of going tiny once you factor in utilities, land, and all those little extras? That's what we're breaking down today. Today we're going to hear from Alaska, also known as the Tiny House Concierge. Alaska is going to answer those key tiny house questions you've been wondering about. But before we dive into the numbers, I've got something really exciting and special I want to share with you all today. I know affordability and being connected to a community are two of the top things that matter to you when you go tiny. Tiny Homes Village in Rock Island, Tennessee, the sponsor for today's video, checks both of those boxes. The community is near Nashville, but in the middle of nowhere, still close to everything you need, like hospitals, shopping, and dining. The community is super peaceful, surrounded by nature. They've got ready-to-go lots with full hookups, and they've even got a brand new rent-to-own program to help you save those upfront costs when you're going tiny. Here's the really cool part. They're offering 50% off the community entry fee if you sign up by the end of September. This is exclusive to you as Make Things Tiny subscribers and viewers. So you've got to go to makethingstiny.com/tinyhomesvillage and sign up to get the discount, or reach out to them and mention Make Things Tiny when you talk to them. So if you've been dreaming about a real sense of community, now's the time. Go to makethingstiny.com/tinyhomesvillage and sign up today. All right, let's jump into it. Let's find out what the real cost of going tiny actually is. All right, I'm here today with Alaska, the Tiny House Concierge. Thank you so much for being on the channel, Alaska. I'm excited for people to learn about you and everything that you do. If you don't mind just talking a little bit about your background and what got you interested in tiny homes, then we can go from there.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. This is great. Yes, I was a former traditional real estate agent, and when I bought my own tiny house back in 2020, I knew they didn't teach us about tiny homes in real estate school, so I went out looking for assistance with that process and help knowing, what constitutes an ownership document and what do you tell an inspector? What should an inspector be looking for? What questions should you ask to do the proper due diligence? How do we transfer funds with this type of housing? And at every stage, I was having to kind of manually execute those steps. There wasn't a clear-cut path. And so I set up the Tiny House Concierge after that experience to help people buy tiny homes, sell tiny homes, and understand what they're getting into with tiny homes.
Did you started it in 2020 when you moved into your tiny house, like at the same time?
I started it shortly thereafter. I think I put my phone number and my website up in 2021, and then just started taking calls because there were a lot of people out there that I found that were in similar situations, but who maybe didn't have that real estate background to kind of understand the pieces of the home buying process and where they could potentially be vulnerable.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that makes sense. And the timing of that makes sense too, because 2020 was kind of when we saw the industry kind of really like take off.
Mm-hmm.
So there's really great timing for you moving into your house and then also starting the concierge business. If you don't mind just talking a little bit about like what are some of the like main services that you offer for people? I think that would be helpful for people to know that are watching.
Sure. Yeah, so I work with new and secondhand homes. I work in every state and to a limited degree Canada. And I work with really anybody and everybody, like I said, that wants to buy, sell, or understand tiny homes. So
Mm-hmm.
I've worked with consumers who want help asking the right questions or doing due diligence on houses. And for that, I offer tiny house consulting. Or if somebody wants to go collect a bunch of houses they find on the internet, I will help them review it and ask solid follow-up questions so that they know what they're getting into with a purchase or with a particular builder. I can recommend builders for people. I can assist with things like, shopping for insurance policies and understanding what questions you need to ask or what to ask a transporter before you let them transport your tiny home. I have storage recommendations, things of that nature. So that's kind of my options for buyers. For sellers, I work with sellers to understand what the current tiny house market is like in terms of resale. And then I work with people in two capacities. One, I provide listing services, so I do as much of the sales process as I can for them. Another option I have if people want to save money on paying commissions is I have a tiny home seller's kit. And I walk people through everything they need to do to sell their tiny home while protecting themselves from liability and while creating a smooth process, so they're not getting a bunch of tire kickers and wasting time there. Other services I offer, I do very basic real estate development consulting. So if somebody has dreams of a community, I can give them kind of an overview of that process and what they're getting into. I can help new builders who are getting up and running and just don't know what they don't know about tiny homes to save them, um, and educate them as to how marketing a tiny home is different than marketing any other kind of product, and about that educational process for buyers, the paperwork that they need to have, and things of that nature to help them get a stronger start in this industry.
Okay. No, I think that makes sense. It's a sort of like a wide variety of services, but really hitting on the technical aspect of getting started in the industry, whether you're a consumer, a builder, a community developer, that sort of thing. And I think that's really helpful because in general, this entire industry and the process for going tiny can be really daunting. In your experience, based on living in the tiny house and what you do with the concierge service, what are some of the key decisions people need to really keep in mind, like the key things they need to keep in mind when they're starting out that process, to help make it a little less daunting, but also to prevent them from potentially getting scammed or having like a negative experience?
Overall, I encourage people to start with what is the goal in going tiny. And so the first question I think people need to ask before you get into certification and building standards and which builder is good and what house is the right one, you really need to look at
Hmm.
what is the goal I'm trying to accomplish, and is a tiny home even the answer there? Much as I love to sell tiny homes, I don't believe this is the right type of housing for everyone. And so, really
Hmm.
understanding where a tiny house is going to be a great solution and where maybe a tiny house is not the most efficient way to meet your goals, I think is an important exploration. If you decide that a tiny house is the right move, from there, you're going to want to look at whether or not you want to try and do that legally. This is in a pioneering stage. And so a lot of people that you see out there living this life are just not parked legally. And that's just a reality of the situation as it stands today. So the next decision to make is how by the book do I want to go? Are you comfortable playing in that gray area space and having a plan A, B, and C if you need to move your house? Or are you only looking to do this if it's 100% permitted by the book and accepted? And if you are looking to do it in a way that's permitted, then you have to make decisions about, am I willing to move to an area where tiny homes have already been recognized and where those systems are already in place to make that happen? Or am I willing to go through a red tape process that may or may not be successful, but I'm going to make an attempt? And so from there, you can kind of jump into what kind of parking space do I want, community versus private land. Then it's a matter of choosing which community versus what kind of zoning do I need in a particular area to make this work. And then from there, we can get into building standard. The word tiny home is wildly unspecific. So, a building standard is like a set of instructions we use to follow a particular thing. And different tiny homes are built to different standards. Some are built to no standards. So from there, we can talk about building standard and then certification. And then we finally get into which house is the right house, which builder is the right builder.
No, I mean, I think that's a lot of questions that to have to go through, and I think it's really important for people to pay attention to that because I do think that unfortunately, because of the way that people have sort of been exposed to this industry, they think it's really simple. They think like I see a cute house on YouTube channel or like I found this perfect home on this website and I'm just gonna make a down payment, get the house, and I'll be good to go. And honestly, like you're saying, there's so many steps before even picking the house that I think
Mm-hmm.
people might find surprising. That being said, even after they do all of those things, I've had a lot of people get stuck on the money side of things. So even though they do all of
Mm-hmm.
the research, they still can't wrap their head around how much it's going to cost or kind of like accept the reality of the price side of things. What in your opinion is sort of like the best thing people can do to prepare for the financing side, and what's the reality of the financing side, if you don't mind sharing, like what's the like an example of like how much it actually costs to go through this process?
Yeah. Well, I should start with a disclaimer. I'm not a lender. Always good to talk with a lender. But as far as what I'm seeing, it financing, this is not the cheapest or easiest form of housing. I would say that just as a statement. If what you're looking
Hmm.
for is to get the lowest possible housing cost, I can almost guarantee you there is a more efficient way than a tiny home. However, that does not mean that a tiny home couldn't be the best fit for you, or that it might not be a lower
Hmm.
cost option than what you're currently doing or the options currently available in your area. Or even if it's, kind of on par with what you would be paying once you get all said and done with land rent and interest rates. And even if it's about the same as an apartment, it still might be worth it to you to own your own structure and have that kind of autonomy and that freedom to, do whatever you want to the walls and have something to sell down the line or have a structure that you can move without actually having to truly pack up. So there are many benefits to a tiny home, but I would caution people who are going into it strictly from a financial standpoint to really, I'd encourage them to really do the math to make sure it's as good of a deal as they are anticipating. Um, so there's different loans out there. I would say most people who are buying a tiny home are either doing so in cash, with a
Hmm.
personal loan, with an RV loan, a line of credit, by borrowing against traditional real estate, by borrowing the cash from friends or family, paying in cash, and then owing their friends and family money.
Yep.
Or we have a couple lenders who have jumped on to create partnerships with certain builders to offer a secured financing arrangement. And so what that means is, whereas a personal loan, you get that, nobody asks what you're doing with the money. It's not secured. It's not attached to the house itself. A secured loan would be attached to the house itself. So the house is acting as collateral. If you don't pay the loan, they're going to take the house, kind of a situation.
Right.
So we have companies like 21st Mortgage. And to make one of those loans work, you often go through the builder. So 21st has already agreed to fund loans for certain builders. And that can make a big difference in the loan term. So with the personal loans, we often see like 10 to 15 years, whereas with a secured financing arrangement, we might see 25 years. So that almost doubles the amount of time you have to pay that loan. And so that significantly drops the monthly payment that you're looking at. I would say interest rate wise, what I see most common is about 10 to 13% interest. So you're definitely paying more in interest than you would on, say, a traditional stick built house or piece of real estate.
A lot. That's a lot more. It's almost
It's a
double.
lot more. There are some people who've gotten lucky with like credit unions or things like that where they're able to
Hmm.
get more like a 7 or 8% loan. I'll say though, a lot of times those fall through. A lot of times, once the credit
Hmm.
union kind of gets into it with the
Okay.
tiny home and starts asking more questions, some of those can kind of back out. So, this is why, again, if somebody's primary goal is the lowest possible housing payment, I just encourage people to ask more questions. If you're borrowing from a friend or family member, obviously maybe they're not going to charge you interest, or maybe they're going to charge you a much lower interest rate.
So that's super helpful. And also, I think the interest rate would surprise a lot of people because that does affect your how much you're going to pay every month. And I really like that you're just being honest and transparent by saying, like, if you're looking to save money, like 100%, the top thing is that you want to have something that's like really, 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 really affordable. Cheap, I think, is what people honestly are expecting. This might not be the route for you, but it doesn't mean that it won't work out. It just means you have to adjust your expectations, which I think is really important for people. Which leads me into my next question is that there's a secondary market within this industry, which is secondhand tiny homes, which is something that you talk a lot about as the price keeps going up and more people are frustrated with that aspect of a new tiny home, what are some of these pros and cons around buying a tiny house that has been previously owned, maybe lived in for a few years?
People always ask me about buying new versus buying secondhand. So this is a great question. I'm a firm believer that there's not a right answer as much as there's a right answer for the particular person in the particular situation. So pros of buying secondhand are going to be that you already know exactly what it is you're going to get. There's no risk of the builder like forgetting to put in that extra closet or something like that. Like you can see the house exactly as it is. You also don't have to wait in a build queue. A lot of these builders are small builders, and it might be 6, even 10 months before you actually get a house. So by buying secondhand, you can get something available immediately, which is great. You also don't risk the builder going bankrupt. So remember, many of these tiny home builders, they're small and the financial situation can be dicey. And so sometimes we see bankruptcy in tiny home builders. And so when the house already exists, you've mitigated that risk. Um, Overall, tiny houses are depreciating assets like cars or RVs. They don't appreciate the way a traditional piece of real estate would, right? So you can get a lower overall price of the house. Now, I'm going to put a star next to that because whether or not your monthly payment is lower has to do with the financing. So we'll get into that in a minute. But when you buy secondhand, you also may get, depending on when the house was built, if you buy something that was built before inflation, we saw builders using higher quality materials then because they could, right? And the sellers who bought the houses at those times did so at a lower price point, which means that when they go to sell you that secondhand home, if they bought it before inflation really kicked in, they may have a higher quality home and they may have less money that they need to make from the sale, which could potentially give you a better deal. So those are the benefits of buying secondhand. Now, the cons are that it can be tougher to qualify for financing to buy a secondhand home. The loan terms are going to be more like 10 to 15 years versus 25 years for a new home. So it's tricky, right? Like you might get an overall better price on the house, but the payment could even be higher for a secondhand home. So you kind of got to do a little bit of exploration there in terms of what financing options are going to be available for the particular house you're trying to buy. So with the secondhand homes, often you're using like a personal loan. And if you do that route, that could max out at $100,000, which means that many tiny homes that are over $100,000, you're going to have to find a way to either get a second personal loan, which is harder to qualify for after the first, or have that in cash or be able to borrow that from a friend or family member. So how you finance the home is probably going to be the biggest piece in helping you make the decision of whether you should buy new versus secondhand. If you're planning to finance a significant portion of the build, you may want to lean toward a new home, but there's more to explore there. And if you can swing a secondhand home from a great builder, that can be a great situation. So, no wrong answer, just the right one for you.
I think that's really helpful information. I don't really know a ton about secondhand tiny homes. I have stayed in a couple, and I know what you're saying. There's obviously going to be pros and cons to both, but I do think that more people need to start checking out that side of things because even though the new ones they look flashy and nice on the internet when you see them, people are. That's the number one thing that I hear from people is like, why are they so expensive? It's the number one comment I get in videos, and it's the primary barrier I see. So I appreciate you walking through the secondhand side of things because it doesn't mean secondhand doesn't mean that it's going to be of less quality or that you're going to get like something bad's going to happen like a year and a half into it. Plenty of new homes can fall apart early in their early stages too. So like that's awesome. I'm really glad that you touched on that. Okay, so moving into the last question, which this is kind of a big question because the industry is changing so much. What do you see as the future of this industry?
Oh, that is such a good question. I don't know if I see
Oh, it's a big one. Yeah,
one
it's a big
future
one.
for the tiny home movement as much as I see many futures for the tiny home movement. I think we're going to continue to see more and more people come to the table and requesting more and more different types of tiny homes. And I'm
Mhm.
actually really excited to see how this movement grows and evolves and expands to invite more people to participate. I think we're going to see different builders stepping into the mix and creating different kinds of products that serve a wider variety of people. So, yeah, I don't think there is one future. I think there's a lot of futures.
I really like how you said that, multiple futures. And yeah, I agree. I think it is going to continue to grow. But I like that you sort of like chop it up into different sections because I do think that there are very distinct aspects of this industry now, where before it was kind of just like budding movement based on being like more socially conscious and downsizing and reducing your carbon footprint. Now we're seeing just the full range of what it looks like when people are getting invested in this in different ways. So yeah, I think multiple futures. I'm curious to see what it looks like. You know, it's changing so quickly. It's not anywhere near where it was a year ago, a year and a half ago. So it's definitely changing quickly. That being said, it's, you know, a great time to get involved and to learn and to do your research and to ask questions. So I appreciate you taking the time to just chat with us about everything that you do and all of your experiences. I know that anyone watching this video is going to get a lot of value out of it, a lot of really helpful information. But beyond that, I hope that they reach out to you and ask questions. So link to everything that you're doing is going to be in the video description, so you can reach out, ask questions, and get connected to you. And yeah, like happy to have you on the channel, you know, anytime, and just a fun conversation. I appreciate you, you know, just teaching us about the things that you've learned.
This was so fun. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you so much, and we'll talk soon.
All right, that was my conversation with Alaska. I appreciate Alaska taking the time to walk us through kind of the good, the bad, the ugly, giving us an honest take on what it means to go tiny, all of the questions you've got to ask yourself before you do it, how to get over some of those finance hurdles. Thank you so much, Alaska, again, for talking to us. Make sure you check out everything that Alaska is doing. Check out their website, check out their finance guide, ask questions, reach out to them. You want to make sure that you do your due diligence so you don't end up with a tiny house that isn't right for you or end up in a situation where you're just not happy. So thank you again, Alaska, for taking the time to chat with us. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe. Make sure you go to makethingstiny.com/tinyhomesvillage if you're interested in getting that 50% off the community entry fee. And don't forget to think tiny. I'll see you guys in the next one.